All right, so yes, sabbatical was amazing. It was all the things that it needed to be for me and my family. I cherished every second with Michelle and the kids. We spent a lot of time together, and a lot of that was in a very small Honda Odyssey for most of that trip. And so for a little over a month, we were on the road, and we did this massive road trip, and we drove from here to Colorado, to Jackson Hole, to the Grand Tetons, to Yellowstone, to Glacier National Park, to Theodore Roosevelt National Park, to the Badlands, to the Boundary Waters, to Chicago and Louisville, and made our way home and had a blast. And we just planned to climb and backpack and hike and paddle our way across America. And we got to check all of those things off, and that was pretty amazing. The plan to accomplish that was extremely involving. So if you can imagine, getting permits for campsites, you have to do that about a year in advance, 9 months to a year now. So just to get in the national parks, to get a campsite, to get permits for backpacking and paddling, to be in those places, you have to win a lottery in order just to have the ability to sign up for some of that. You think of just the stops along the ways, the things that we had to consider. Okay, when are we going to do laundry? When are we going to stop and eat and sleep, and where we're going to stay? And we slept in a tent for a good portion of the summer. And it was awesome. And the plan made that possible. I couldn't have done it. It took all year to consider all the small details along the way. But like any good plan, what happens? It completely comes off the rails. And so, of course, when we were backpacking in Glacier National Park, so yes, I brought a 6 and a 10 and a 12-year-old backpacking. And I assumed, just like you would, that it would just not work out as good as I hoped. And even, like we were backpacking on our first day, and we had 11 miles to hike. And we were probably 3/4 of the way through the day, and the kids just kind of stopped, and they turned around and looked at me, and I was like, oh, here we go. Like, I'm definitely going to be carrying all of our things, not just 80% of them for the rest of the day. And I thought they were just going to sit down and revolt. And they just turned around, and Catherine was just like, Dad, this is just beautiful. This is great. And then they turned around and kept hiking. I was like, yes, like, what do you know? Like, this is amazing, Lord. This is so good. And so we hiked, and we finished the hike. We got off trail, and I turned my phone on, and I got a text from one of my best friends, John. And he said, hey, just so you know, the Boundary Waters are on fire. It's probably not going to work out like you think it's going to. And so, sure enough, look it up, and 1/3 of the country is covered in smoke, and it's coming from Canada and the Boundary Waters. The Boundary Waters is a section between Minnesota and Canada. It's infinite lakes and rivers and just amazing paddling. And so we're like, well, they haven't canceled our permits yet, so we know that, like, we still got to head that direction. We've got rentals and food and lodging and all this stuff set up for that next leg of the trip, for that whole next week. We just don't know what to do. So what do you generally do in those situations? Is you just call an old friend. And so that's what we did. We called an old friend who owned a camp in the North Woods of Wisconsin. We said, hey, we don't know which way the wind's blowing or what's happening. And they just set us up. I mean, amazingly. They gave us the best cabin in camp. They pulled the kids out of the car. The girls got to go to girls' camp. Colt kept wondering, where's all the boys? And there's no boys because it's a girls' camp in northern Wisconsin. And so we just figure out what's next. And then, of course, the camp said, hey, well, they officially canceled your Boundary Waters trip. So let's just, we'll give you boats and we'll give you gear. And you can just make something happen here. Awesome. So I used to guide in that area, and so I got to kind of relive the glory days of going back and paddling in Wisconsin. We were on the Namakagon River. Now, the reason why I wanted to go to the Boundary Waters is because it is some of the best fishing in the world. There is only canoes allowed on it, so there's very little pressure. And as you get back to all these small lakes, there's just fish on fish on fish on fish. And so that was the plan, is we were going to get up there and I was going to teach Catherine, Claire, and Colt how to paddle my canoe. And I was just going to Cash Scarta, sit on the front of the boat and just throw a line in the water all day long until we got to where we were going. It didn't matter how long it took. I just wanted to fish. And so the plan didn't change when we went to the Namakagon River. The Nam is known for amazing fishing. So like we're paddling and we saw thousands of fish. I mean, 7-foot sturgeons are like 2 feet under your boat. A 40, 50-inch muskie like went by us one day and we're just freaking out, and smallmouth bass and walleye and all these things. And so naturally, we just fished and fished and fished. Imagine all the fish we caught. None. None, not one. We fished for 3 days straight. And I was like, oh, we're going to fish. Nope, not a fish. And we tried every single thing you can think of. Like we changed our baits, we changed the lures, we changed how fast we were reeling. We were, throwing in deep water and swift water and shallow water and in the shade and in the sun. And we changed the colors. And I brought, a big kind of tackle box. Nothing. And you know what? John 21, the disciples are in the same boat. Let's turn there. My net was empty, and so was theirs. The disciples are in a boat. They have the equipment and the experience. They know the water. Peter, the sons of Zebedee, have spent most of their lives fishing, and they catch nothing. So read alongside me. Here we go, verses 1 to 14. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples, no name necessary, were together. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, okay, we're going to go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just as day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. Yet the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, do you have any fish? And they answered, no. He said to them, cast the net to the right side of the boat and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved therefore said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. The other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out of land, they saw a charcoal fire in place, with fish laid on it and bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish that you have just caught. So Simon Peter went aboard and hauled the net ashore full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. And Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the 3rd time that Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. So Simon Peter says, I'm going to go fishing. And we don't know everything behind that statement. Maybe Peter is uncertain about what comes next. Jesus has risen, but Peter doesn't understand what his future is going to look like. Maybe he's hungry. Maybe he just needs something familiar. Maybe fishing is just simply something that he just knows how to do. Whatever his reason, several of the other disciples go with them. They climb into the boat and they fish through the night. And much like me, they catch nothing. And they didn't fail because they were lazy. They were working. They weren't sitting on the shore waiting for fish to jump in the boat. They were casting their nets. They were pulling them back in. They were moving the boat, and they were trying again. These are experienced fishermen doing something they know how to do, and they have nothing to show for it. I came back from sabbatical wanting to cast, wanting to catch, wanting to serve and be fruitful for this community. But if I do not understand what happens next in this story, I'll end up exactly where Peter is right now. In the boat, before morning, working hard and catching nothing. Sabbatical may not be your word for it, but some of you know exactly what I'm describing. We all have boats like that. Places where we feel competent, where we understand the language and know what's expected. Places where we know how to work and contribute and solve problems and get things done. For Peter, it's a fishing boat. For us, it could be work or family or marriage, even the church. And mind you, there's nothing wrong with being capable. There's nothing wrong with developing experience and working hard. The danger comes when we begin trusting our competence to produce the only thing that Christ can give. We can be skilled and we can be empty. We can know that what we are doing and still reach the end of the night with nothing in the net. And the frightening thing is that sometimes it's just not anything obviously wrong. We may simply be doing what we know how to do without recognizing how deeply we still need to hear from Jesus. John says that as the morning begins to break, Jesus stood on the shore and the disciples don't recognize him. And then he calls them from a distance, "Boys, children, did you catch anything?" And they answer, "No." It's a small word, but it's an honest one. No, nothing in the net. No impressive report. No way to make the night sound more successful than it was. Jesus doesn't shame them. He doesn't give them a lecture. He says, "Well, cast the net on the right side of the boat, and there you'll find some." You don't have to be an engineer to know that the right side is not very far from the left side of the boat. These men have spent all night on the water. They know what they've tried, and they know that they failed, but they cast again. And now suddenly they can't bring in the net because of the number of fish. And their night didn't change because all of a sudden they had a better technique. It changes when a voice from the shore interrupts their experience and their expertise. And even as Jesus calls to them, they still don't recognize that it's him. All they have is a voice coming across the water, telling them to trust him with one more cast. You may experience this also in your life, that sometimes faithfulness begins before clarity ever arrives. Sometimes we don't understand everything Jesus is doing. We simply hear him calling us to forgive, to pray, to tell the truth, or to take the next faithful step. The question is not whether you worked hard. The question is whether we can still hear him. And notice what happens when the nets fill. John doesn't shout, "Look at all the fish." He says, "It's the Lord." The catch is not the point of the story. The catch reveals who's standing on the shore. They turn their attention away from what is in the net and towards the one who provides it. And then Peter does what Peter does. He jumped into the water. He didn't wait for them to reach shore. He's not trying to process the moment. He's not helping with the fish. He just gets to Jesus as fast as he can. And when Peter reaches the shore, John gives us an important detail. There's a charcoal fire, fish are laying on it, and there's bread. And then Jesus says, "Bring some of the fish that you just caught." Notice what's there when they arrive. Jesus already has fish. Before the disciples drag their net to the shore, Jesus has breakfast cooking. They have spent their entire night trying to obtain something that Jesus already possesses. Jesus does invite them to bring some of their catch. Their work isn't meaningless. Their obedience matters. The contribution is absolutely welcome, but their fish is not what makes the meal possible. Jesus is not waiting helplessly for them to produce something. He's already providing. We often live life as though everything depends on us. Our families depend on us, and our work depends on us. The church depends on us. And everything's going to fall apart unless we keep casting and pulling and fixing and organizing and producing. But when the disciples reached the shore, Jesus is not panicking. He's just cooking breakfast. There's something deeply freeing about that. He has bread, he has fish, he has fire. He says, come and eat. Before Jesus asked Peter to care for anyone, he feeds Peter. Before he mentions Peter's calling, he gives Peter bread. Before he addresses Peter's failure, he gives Peter a place beside the fire. Peter comes to the shore dripping wet, exhausted from the night, and carrying fish that Jesus provided. And Jesus says, come and eat. Man, what a picture of grace. Grace is not Jesus waiting for us to bring enough. Grace is discovering that Jesus has already prepared what we can never provide for ourselves. Sabbath is one of the ways that God reminds us of this. The world continues even when we stop and rest in his presence. The church remains Christ's church even if we step away. Our families remain in his hands when we go to bed at night. Sabbath exposes the belief that everything depends on our labor, and it reminds us that before we are workers or leaders or parents or teachers or pastors or servants, we are people invited to receive from Christ. But John wants us to notice more than the breakfast. He specifically tells us that this is a charcoal fire. That phrase only appears one other time in John's gospel. In John 18, Peter is standing beside another charcoal fire. It's when Jesus is arrested. Peter is followed at a distance in the courtyard of the high priest. And then people begin to ask Peter, hey, aren't you one of his disciples? And Peter says, oh, no. 3 times. 3 times he denies knowing the one that he promised never to abandon. And now in John 21, Peter steps to the shore and he smells charcoal. Smells can be a time machine that can bring us back in an instant. A perfume can remind you of someone that you haven't seen in decades. The smell of a house can bring you back to an old childhood memory. A campfire can transport you to an old campsite, and that charcoal fire may have taken Peter directly back to the worst night of his life. So let me ask a question. What failure still feels like a fire that you cannot approach? What memory causes you to keep your distance from Christ? Whether it's a promise you broke, or person you wounded, maybe a moment where fear mattered more than faithfulness. We often assume that Jesus will just either ignore these places or condemn us in them. But Jesus does neither with Peter. Does not pretend that the denial never happened. And he does not force Peter to remain forever defined by it. Jesus meets Peter beside another fire. And the place that smells like failure has become the place where breakfast and provision is waiting. Jesus didn't recreate the scene to humiliate Peter. He recreates it so Peter can discover that his worst failure is not a place from which Jesus has withdrawn. The fire is no longer only the place where Peter denied Jesus, and Jesus lets Peter eat before he ever asked him to speak. And after they have eaten, Jesus turns to him. Let's look at this in verses 15 to 19. Chapter 21. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young and you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." There's no missing what is happening here. 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 opportunities for Peter to confess what fear once caused him to deny. Jesus does not ask Peter whether he feels qualified in the moment. He doesn't ask Peter whether he has developed a better strategy. He doesn't ask Peter to promise to never fail again. The only thing Jesus asks is, "Do you love me?" And the question comes before the assignment. The center of our Christian life is not, are you useful? It's not, are you impressive? Or have you produced enough to prove your value? It's, do you love Jesus? And every time Peter confesses his love, Jesus places someone into his care. Well, then feed my lambs. Tend my sheep, feed my sheep. Love for Jesus moves towards the people Jesus loves. Look around you. It serves, it teaches, it encourages, it walks patiently with people. And the order of operations matters. Peter is not told to feed the sheep so that Jesus will love him. Peter's not being asked to erase his failure through usefulness. He's already sitting at the table. He's already been fed. He's already been welcomed to the fire. His care for the sheep will not purchase grace. It's going to grow from grace. Service can never become the substitute for loving Jesus. One of these 2 things occurs. We can serve because we love Christ, or we can serve because we're trying to prove ourselves. Those 2 acts of service may look very similar from the outside. Both can preach, both can teach, both can organize events and visit hospitals and care for children and help your neighbors and stack chairs. But one grows from communion with Jesus and the other grows from fear. Fear says, I have to prove myself. I have to keep everyone satisfied. And love says, Jesus has already met me on the shore. I can serve faithfully without pretending to be anyone's savior. And notice whose sheep they are. He says, my lamb, my sheep. Peter's not given ownership, he's given stewardship. The people entrusted to us belong to Jesus well before they're ever entrusted to you. We're called to love them, not possess them, to serve them and not save them, to care for them without pretending that every outcome rests on our shoulders. The flock belongs to Jesus. There's freedom in that. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from pretending that everything depends on us. Jesus then tells Peter that following him will be costly. One day, Peter will be led where he doesn't want to go. Grace does not remove sacrifice from Peter's life. It just changes why he sacrifices. Remember, Peter is the one who boasted that he was more faithful than everyone else. He once believed that he could prove his devotion through how courageous that he could be. But now Jesus is building Peter's life on something deeper than his confidence in himself. Peter says, Lord, you know. In this moment, he doesn't make another boast. He doesn't say, I'll never fail you again. He just places himself in the knowledge of Jesus. Lord, you know me. You know my failure. You know my weakness. And you know that I love you. Then Jesus gives Peter the same words that he gave him when Peter first dropped his nets. He says, follow me. He recommissions Peter. And you would think Peter in that moment would say, oh, absolutely, let's go. Lord, wherever you lead, I'll follow. I'm right behind you. Now, what does Peter do? He looks over at John and says, well, what about him? What about this man? It is remarkable how quickly we can move from Jesus speaking directly to us to wondering what he's going to do with someone else. Well, what about their calling? What about their success? What about the way that their net seems to keep filling? And Jesus answers Peter, if it's my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? You follow me. Peter doesn't need John's assignment. He needs faithfulness of his own. We can spend an enormous amount of time and energy watching other boats, comparing results, opportunities, hardships, families, callings, timelines. Jesus doesn't need to explain everyone else's path to us. He just gives us our command. You follow me. Peter's recommissioning is not go and be impressive. It's not go make up for your failure. It just begins with an invitation. Come to the shore. Receive what Christ provides. Let him meet you in the place that you'd rather avoid. Love him. And because you love him, care for the people who belong to him and follow him. I've returned from sabbatical extremely grateful and eager to serve this church and community. But this passage reminds me also that my calling nor anyone else's calling can be sustained by pressure to prove. Before any of us ask what we need to produce, Jesus asks whether we love him and whether we'll follow him. We need to consider where we're at in the story. Some of us are still in the boat, exhausted from trying to force empty nets to become full. Some of us hear a voice from the shore, but we're just not yet sure who's calling. Some of us are keeping our distance because the fire smells too much like a previous failure. But Jesus is not standing beside the fire to condemn Peter. He's there with bread and fish, and not an invitation to come ashore with an impressive catch. It's just simply to come. Come with empty nets. Come with a night that you can't change. Come with failures that you can't undo. Come with questions and fatigue and regret, but come and eat. And when Jesus asks, do you love me? You don't have to answer with a boasting about how strong you're going to be from here on out. Just answer as Peter did. Lord, you know. You know my failure. You know my fear. You know my mixed motives. You know every part of my story. And you know that I love you. And that's where recommissioning begins. Not in pretending that failure never happened or promising that we're never going to fail again. It just begins in the presence of Jesus beside a fire, receiving grace and hearing his call. You're fed before you sin. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. And Jesus says, follow me. Let's pray.